we had completed the paragraph on page 38. I don't know about your editions, book 1, canto 3. That is the line, detect the magic bride in her disguise or scan the apparent face of thought and life. And I had given you quite a long explanation from Sri Aurobindo regarding the 4 levels of intuition, which were inspiration, revelation, discrimination, and seizing the truth. Now today we are going to take up a passage which I think is one of the rarest passages in all literature, that is describing exactly how does inspiration work. And we know now that inspiration is one of the 4 modes of working of intuition. If you remember, the levels beyond the mind do not have inspiration as a separate level. There is what we have, the higher mind, the illumined mind, and then the intuitive mind. And of that intuitive mind, there are 4 different aspects. One of them is inspiration. And of course, beyond inspiration, the higher level closer to the intuition is the revelation. So we have revelation first, then inspiration, then there is discrimination or discernment of truth, and then there is the truth touch or seizure of truth. Well, today we are going to come across all these 4 aspects in a different manner. I'll come to that when we have a greater description of inspiration. I read out this passage on inspiration last time because it is indeed a very inspiring reading itself. And you may, it's not a very strict barrier. Inspiration is not a very strict compartment. There is definitely an overlapping between inspiration and revelation. So let's make the boundaries a little flexible and not say this much is inspiration, that much is revelation. There is always a kind of an interspersing. But we get here the manner inspiration works in human life. On what levels does it work? So let me read some passages, some lines, and then I'll take you to a reading from the mother, and we can get a very simple description from her. Oft inspiration with a lightning feet, a sudden messenger from the all-seeing tops, traversed the soundless corridors of his mind, bringing her rhythmic sense of hidden things. A music spoke, transcending mortal speech, as if from a golden phial of the all-bliss, a joy of light, a joy of sudden sight, a rapture of the thrilled, undying word poured into his heart as into an empty cup. A repetition of God's first delight, creating in a young and virgin time. In a brief moment caught, a little space, all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts, lodged in the expectant stillness of his depths, a crystal of the ultimate absolute, a portion of the inexpressible truth, revealed by silence, to the silent soul. There are a few things I've just note those words, and then I'll try to explain. Otherwise, it is not so difficult, but there are a few points that I would like you to concentrate on. That is, traverse the soundless corridors of his mind. Then there is this undying word. And then we have, last line, revealed by silence to the silent soul. So there is a stress on how to receive inspiration. The stress is on silence. We understand one of the prerequisites of opening ourselves to these realms beyond the mind is basically to silence the mind. In fact, that is one of the main functions or roles of meditation in integral yoga. To silence the mind, not to enjoy its passive silence, but to silence it so that it can receive the higher. See, there is not a motive, but there is a journey beyond the silencing of the mind. So the silencing of the mind is not per se. It has a greater aim to receive the higher levels of inspiration, call it revelation. So here I have a reading from the mother, her collected works, volume 10, on page 2 itself. There is an aphorism from Sri Aurobindo. The mother is explaining these aphorisms of Sri Aurobindo. And on page 1 of this volume 10, there is an aphorism which goes like this. There are two allied powers in man, knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is so much of the truth seen in a distorted medium as the mind arrives at by groping. Wisdom, what the eye of the divine vision sees in the spirit. Well, it was while explaining this that the mother comes to the explanation of inspiration. So the second aphorism says, inspiration is a slender river of brightness leaping from a vast and eternal knowledge. It exceeds reason more perfectly than reason exceeds the knowledge of the senses. Now, this is the explanation that I wanted to read out. Inspiration is a slender river of brightness. So there are important words: slender, brightness, leaping from a vast and eternal knowledge. That means that is a thin stream of knowledge coming from above. And then it exceeds reason more perfectly than reason exceeds the knowledge of the senses. So the difference between inspiration and mind is exactly or more or less the same difference between mind and the senses. So you can now get a kind of a perspective to see how far beyond is inspiration beyond our mind. The mother explains, a certain number of the questions you have asked are alike. Why did Sri Aurobindo say it like this? one thing or another, etc. I shall select some questions. The first one which interested me, because it comes from a thoughtful person, concerns the word knowledge and compares the way Sri Aurobindo has used the word in this aphorism with the way he used it in the aphorism we read last week. Many people have asked why Sri Aurobindo said that the river is slender. Now this is where the explanation begins. This is an expressive image which creates a striking contrast between the immensity of the divine supramental knowledge, the origin of this inspiration, which is infinite, and what a human mind can perceive of it and receive from it. Even when you are in contact with these domains, the portion, so to say, which you perceive is minimal, slender. It is like a tiny little stream or a few falling drops, and these drops are so pure, so brilliant, so complete in themselves, that they give you the sense of a marvelous inspiration, the impression that you have reached infinite domains and risen very high above the ordinary human condition. And yet this is nothing in comparison with what is still to be perceived. I have also been asked if the psychic being or psychic consciousness is the medium through which the inspiration is perceived. Well, first of all, let's complete the first paragraph itself. Yes, that's what Sri Aurobindo would describe. I'll come back to Savitri lines later, but let's understand that inspiration, the mind, and the sensorial knowledge. These are three different levels, almost equidistant from each other. And then inspiration itself is so far from the supermind that what it gives to mankind or to the human mind is only drops of the supramental knowledge. So again, try to imagine what must be the difference between inspiration and the supramental knowledge itself. That is the vast difference that we see, where we'll get a description where the supramental knowledge is like an oceanic knowledge, and whereas inspiration is only drops of that divine knowledge that comes into us. Now the second question, who receives inspiration in man? Which part of the human being? So here she says, generally yes, the first contact you have with higher regions is a psychic one. Certainly, before an inner psychic opening is achieved, it is difficult to have these inspirations. So that's a very important eye-opener. I did not know about that. That it is important to have some kind of a psychic opening. Without that, it is difficult to have these inspirations. It can happen as an exception and under exceptional conditions as a grace. But the true contact comes through the psychic, because the psychic consciousness is certainly the medium with the greatest affinity with the divine truth. And now we have one more of those discoveries as to why we need the psychic contact. You see, that's what is so... I become more and more astonished as I read on into this literature, when I realize that all said and done, nothing can be done without the psychic. You go spiritual, you go to the divine, towards the divine, you go towards the higher levels of the mind. Everything seems to be connected with the psychic contact. So that is why I have noticed this, and I told you and I shared with you, that take it from every angle, the evolutionary angle, personal development angle, integral development, even to the extent of having connection with inspiration. Everywhere, everything is born by the psychic being. So we get to understand why Sri Aurobindo and the mother they have been continuously telling us about the psychic realization. So that's one more reason. Now later, when one has emerged from the mental consciousness into a higher consciousness beyond the mind, beyond even the higher mind, and when one opens oneself to the overmind regions, and through the overmind to the supermind, one can receive inspirations directly. Naturally, at that point they become more frequent, richer, if one may say so, more complete. There comes a time when inspiration can be obtained at will, but this obviously demands considerable inner development. As we have just said, this inspiration from regions far above the mind surpasses in value and quality the highest achievements of the mind, such as reason. Reason is certainly at the apex of human mental activity. It can review and control the knowledge acquired with the help of the senses. It has often been said that the senses are altogether defective instruments of knowledge, that they are incapable of perceiving things as they are, that the information they supply is superficial and very often faulty. When it is fully developed, the human reason knows this and does not trust the knowledge of the senses. It is only if one is infra-rational, if I may say so, that one believes that all one sees, hears or touches is absolutely true. I mean, that has been again a very powerful idea there. That I come to understand one of the parameters of the growth of your consciousness could be this, that the higher you go, then you understand that the knowledge that you acquire from the senses is absolutely untrue, if not absolutely more or less untrue. And look at the mother using a very strong word there. It's only if one is infra-rational that one believes that this sensorial knowledge is true. So the moment you can already see that levels infra-rational, you believe all that you receive from senses is true. You go to the rational level, you already say no. The knowledge of the senses is not true. There is a mixture, something true but more or less untrue. And if you go to the inspirational level, the level of inspiration and higher levels, then you see that the knowledge that we beget from senses is so far away from truth. As soon as one is developed in the region of higher reason, one knows that all these notions are almost essentially false, and that one can in no way rely on them. But the knowledge one receives from this supramental or divine region surpasses all that can be conceived or understood by reason, at least to the same extent that reason surpasses the knowledge of the senses. So that is the second thought that I thought I should share with you, which gives us really a comparison between sensorial knowledge, rational knowledge, and knowledge from inspiration. So, to emphasize on what reason tells us, or what we think that what we get from the senses is true, I mean, it really tells us on what level of consciousness we are, the infra-rational. So it's really amazing to see, you see the mother and Sri Aurobindo having that supramental knowledge, how much they would have seen this falsity or the falsehood of the senses, and people, and all of us people like us going to the mother and telling her, asking her, bothering her with things that we get the knowledge from our senses mostly, and of course reason. But that's what I'm trying to understand. How did they manage, I mean, with that constant supramental vision, where they could see the falsity of every word that we are speaking, or all this, so much of the darkness in our consciousness, and yet what was wonderful was they, at least I cannot say they, I can say only she, because I talked to her, and yet she never gave the impression that she was fed up with us, or that she could see through your falsehood. And yet she was all the time the sweetness and the beauty and the love, knowing fully well that, that what you are speaking is so untrue and all that. Well, there have been incidences where somebody told the mother that, "Mother, what the person told you before me was completely wrong information." Mother said, "Yes, I know. It was completely false. I'm aware of that." But she said, "You see, I have to work with these people." And then the divine diplomat, what she did was to separate these two people. Because one person was going, X was going after Y. So she told X not to come after Y. So that, there could be some kind of a harmony and each other saying, "No, you're telling a lie to the mother." She separated their timing so they don't meet upstairs at all. That was the divine diplomat. But interesting thing is, she said, "Yes, I'm aware of the untruth that they are speaking." And I suppose that was one of the things which really made us conscious that when we went to the mother, not ever to tell a lie or tell something false, because we are conscious that she can see my lies, she knows my falsehood. So what's the fun of trying to hide things from her, because she sees it absolutely like a plain glass. So this knowledge, of course, we had when we were children also, that she can see us through and through. So there's no question of hiding our thoughts and our emotions, whatever they may be, good or bad. As she told somebody, I don't know if I told you last time, someone told the mother, "Mother, when we come to you, we have such bad ideas and we're very cloudy and sometimes very dirty emotions." So the mother said, "Well, that's what it is. You come to me and offer whatever you are, good, bad, dark, better." But then the person went on repeating, saying, "No, mother, when we come to you, at least we should have the pure thoughts and good thoughts and all that." Then she said, "You don't have to pretend what you are not. You be exactly what you are. Why do you want to pretend that you are a yogi when you are not?" So she said the sentence is, "Don't try to be a yogi when you are not. Don't pretend to be a yogi when you are not." So this pretension is what she told us when we were children to avoid, because she could see the truth. And this is now I see from a philosophic explanation that from their consciousness to see our falsehood is not a great effort. It's a very natural, normal thing that she could see. But I believe it is that avataric mother who tolerated all that. And so she smiled, she has a love, she could embrace us, she could give us blessings, she could give us advice. So that was the beauty of the avatar. It's not just having somebody, it's not a mechanical thing that they have a supramental thing and they just judge you from the supramental consciousness and they say, "Hey, you are all falsehood." But the mother of love, that came forward, I think, to embrace us in spite of what we were. So that is the second one. But rationally, it gives us a new idea that to rely completely on the sensorial knowledge is almost to be on the infra-rational level. The third question. Several questions concern a practical point. How to develop the capacity for inspiration? What are the conditions needed to receive inspiration? And is it possible to have it constantly? I have already replied to this. When one opens oneself to the supramental regions, one puts oneself in the right state for receiving constant inspirations. Until then, the best method is to silence the mind as much as possible, to turn it upwards and to remain in a state of silent and attentive receptivity. The more one is able to establish a silent, perfect calm in the mind, the more one becomes capable of receiving inspirations. Well, as a student, I had asked her the same question. I did not know about all this reading. And she told me exactly the same thing, but with one little different word, I remember. She said, silence the mind as much as possible and turn it upwards like a mirror, she said, and hold it like a mirror. The mind silenced and turned upwards and hold it like a mirror, so that it can reflect the higher thought, the higher inspiration. That's the only word that differs in what she has written here and what she told me. To turn it upwards and to remain in a state of silent and attentive receptivity. The more one is able to establish a silent, perfect calm in the mind, the more one becomes capable of receiving inspirations. It was also asked whether inspirations are of different qualities. In their origin, no. They always come down from the regions of pure knowledge and penetrate to whatever part of the human being is most receptive, best adapted to receive them. But these inspirations may apply to different domains of action. They can be inspirations of pure knowledge. They can also be inspirations that contribute to one's effort to progress. And they can also be inspirations for action, which help in the practical and outer realization. But the question here is the use one makes of the inspiration rather than of the quality of the inspiration. The inspiration is always like a drop of light and truth which succeeds in penetrating the human consciousness. When the human consciousness what the human consciousness does with this drop depends on the attitude, the need, the occasion, the circumstances. It does not alter the essential nature of the inspiration, but it does alter the use one makes of it, its practical application. So that was one thing. But you must have noted here what I wanted to tell you from these lines were this absolute condition of soundlessness, then the question of absolute silence, and this is what Ashwapati here, two experiences that when he is in this silence, on this absolute silence and zone of soundlessness, then he receives inspiration. And so to come back to the lines, now oft inspiration with a lightning feet, for that you can understand the swiftness, its rapidity, a sudden messenger from the all-seeing tops, because what the mother has really described here, the tops of the pure knowledge, I suppose, traverse the soundless corridors of his mind. Obviously it has to be soundless corridors, that's because the mind is silenced here. And as she describes here, the silencing of the mind as much as possible, to turn it upwards and to remain in a state of silence. So that's what is this. And bringing her rhythmic sense of hidden things, a music spoke, transcending mortal speech. As if from a golden phial of the all bliss you can see A and B capital, that means the source of this inspiration. Now, that's what is interesting to see, that these inspirations don't just bring us only knowledge. There is an accompaniment of the bliss, of Ananda. So that's what is really, maybe must be attractive. It's not a pure dry knowledge. There is something of this divinity, something of this Ananda aspect, the bliss aspect. So when one gets inspiration, one sometimes bursts into music, sometimes one bursts into writing a poem, because there is this delight aspect here. He tells us a joy of light, a joy of sudden sight, a rapture of the thrilled, undying word. So this is what is essential, that the joy, the thrill accompany this drops of knowledge, poured into his heart as into an empty cup, a repetition of God's first delight, creating in a young and virgin time. This image is almost biblical, if I can say. What is this repetition? The repetition is the joy. You know, the Ashwapati or the poet or the musician or the scientist, whoever it may be, is receiving inspiration. He has that first joy. And Sri Aurobindo compares that joy with God's own first delight. What was God's first delight? When He created in a young and virgin time. So that is the first moment when God created this world. Because I call it biblical because the word creation, God's creation has come into picture here. Normally, as I told you many a time, in Indian philosophy we don't have God creating the world, but in the biblical we have this word of God creating the world. So in a young and virgin time, that is in the primordial time, at the time of the beginning of this earth, of the creation, so whatever delight God had, there is a miniature repetition of the same delight in a poet or in a musician when he gets that inspiration. So it is so pure, so intense almost. That's why all this bursting of immense poetry and music is because it comes from Ananda. It comes from bliss. So whatever comes through bliss has that creative capability. In a brief moment caught, a little space, all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts, lost in the expectant stillness of its depths. Again the question of the stillness of the depths. That means knowledge comes into him in wordless thoughts. A crystal of the ultimate absolute, a portion of the inexpressible truth. Now I got arrested again with this word, with this phrase, all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts. Why has Sri Aurobindo used this description? Wordless thought. Because thought is always with words. You see, the very fact that I say I have a thought has words, it has sentences. So, I wanted to go deeper there, and again I came to asking the mother, what does it mean? And she gives in this volume 9 on page 381, 82, 83. It is very interesting to see, because this is commonly we think thought and ideas, and we mix up all these words. We make no distinction between ideas and words and all that, and thoughts. But Mother here explains very well, in simple terms, and I am reading it out from 382, I am skipping some page 381. And then, if you are able to concentrate the thought sufficiently and stop it from vacillating, you pass quite naturally from the thought expressed by the words to the idea which is behind and which would be expressed in other words, other forms. The characteristic of the idea is the power to clothe itself in many different thoughts. So the first difference is, thought is lower and idea is the higher source. So it's the idea which, when it clothes itself in different words, that is called thought. So there's a difference between idea. So idea is basically wordless, without any sentences. That's why you see we have one idea that may come in Germany or in Africa or in China or India. But we have expressed that idea in different words. And that means we have those words which are there in our own language. So we have all caught the same idea, say like one of those beautiful historic examples of Confucius and the Buddha. They're more or less at the same time, but thousands of miles apart, and in those days it was maybe more, it was perhaps they could never reach each other. And yet, the ideas of morality came in, and both the Buddha here and Confucius there caught the ideas, and they expressed them in their own language in different ways, but basically we see the commonness of these ideas. In fact, I was reading the Vedas, I read out something. It's the same thing. First we catch the idea, and then I express it the way I can in my own limited language. So basically what does it mean? And when you have achieved this, you have already gone much deeper than by merely understanding the words. Naturally, if you continue to concentrate and know how to do it, you can pass from the idea to the luminous force that is behind. Then you enter a much vaster and deeper domain. But that asks for some training. But still, there is the very principle of meditation. Now, this is something that we can directly apply to Savitri. Why does she say oftentimes that you don't have to understand and yet to read, keep reading Savitri and reading it aloud if possible. So now we see that the words you may not understand. You may catch at the idea. You see, some people say, I caught the idea but I cannot explain. But more than that, you may pass from the idea to the luminous force that is behind. Now we understand why Savitri is so important, that you catch the force behind. And of course for me, very frankly, it's the same thing with every book of Sri Aurobindo. Not just Savitri, it may be the Life Divine, it may be anything else. I mean, I for one cannot make any distinction. Because when I read anything of Sri Aurobindo, it's the same thing. It's the force behind. So that is what gives me the joy of delight, what Sri Aurobindo would call here beautifully, the joy of sudden sight. That means we feel the presence of the Master. And that's what is, I suppose, most essential. So you may or may not understand the words, you may get into the idea level, and yet, if you, as the mother has said, read a few lines from Savitri or any passage from Sri Aurobindo, then she says, meditate on those lines. Why does she say so? Now we get the meaning. By meditating on those lines, it's not that you will understand better. No, don't hope for that. You may get into the idea, but if one is close in the heart, one will feel the presence of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So the essential benefit, under quotes, is that we feel them. And if you remember last time when I quoted something that, why do you go to the Samadhi? She said to concentrate and to develop devotion for Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So it's very essential to develop devotion. And it's not just reading mentally, intellectually and trying to understand, okay, I've got it, got the meaning. You may look up the word meaning and you may say, I got the meaning of the words. But sometimes it's so beautiful, you'll see, you have caught the meaning of the word, but you have not yet caught the idea behind it. So this is very important. And the more she told Mona Sarkar and everyone who asked her about Savitri, keep your mind silent, keep your mind silent. That means mind should not project and say, hey, what's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of this word? Why is Sri Aurobindo using this image? Isn't it contradictory? Hey, he's jumping from one to the other. You know, the mind projected all the time, asks questions, has doubts. So she perhaps tells us, make it silent, make it quiet, so that we can catch the idea and behind the idea the presence. And you see further what she says. If you are able to go deep enough, you find the principle, P capital, and force behind the idea, and that gives you the power of realization. That is what we call the mantra. The principle and the force behind the idea. So you have the thought with words, idea, and what we said is the luminous force or the principle which gives you the power of realization. This is how those who take meditation as a means of spiritual development are able to unite with the principle which is behind things and obtain the power to act on these things from above. This is the secret of many of Indian yogis. You must have read an autobiography of a yogi. Most of you might have read that book. It's a marvelous book which tells us about the practice of yogis in India. And there was a description of a group of yogis going to somebody and they asked for food. I mean, it was customary in those days when a sannyasi or a yogi comes to your house, it's a very spontaneous gesture, you give him food. But here was a whole group of them, maybe 50, 80 people, or maybe 100, I don't remember. So for any household to give food suddenly to 100 people is quite impossible. But here was a yogi sadhak exactly of this type who could unite with the principle which is behind things. That means he could unite with the principle of the annam, the food element, the material prosperity of the food. And so he says, all right, all of you, my guests, be seated. So he doesn't get into a kitchen and he doesn't start cooking. But he contacts this principle. And with that, all the guests are surprised that not only dishes come in front of them, but they were all gold dishes. So they're all strewn around, all those 100 of them sitting, and each one of them had a gold dish, and the next moment there's food in that. And so they all had their fill, but the moment the food was over, the lunch was over, all these gold dishes vanish, they go back. So I really wondered, I said, what is this? Is it magic? Is it black magic? No, it is exactly this. These yogis knew how to connect with the principle. And that is how they could play with matter, that's how they could manipulate matter. You see, for us to manipulate matter, we need material things. But what these yogis did was to go to the principle of matter itself. And from there, they could manipulate. They could make it vanish, they could make it come, they could make it into a ring or a necklace or something. So here, coming back to our reading, we see if you are able to go deep enough, you find the principle and the force behind the idea, and that gives you the power of realization. This is how those who take to meditation, that's why I came to that idea of the yogis, those who take to meditation as a means of spiritual development are able to unite with the principle which is behind things and obtain the power to act on these things from above. And I use the word manipulate. So it is not necessary that, how is it that Indian yogis in the time of Vedas, they told us great secrets about the different universes, about the different planets, about the beings who inhabited all these planets. They did not know about science or scientific equipment, nothing. But they had connected with the essential principle of matter. But even without going so far, that implies a rather hard discipline, doesn't it? A long-standing habit. You can pass quite easily from the thought to the idea, and that gives you a light and an understanding in the mind which enables you, in your turn, to express the idea in any form. That's again a beautiful thing. You see, once you catch the idea, then you can express it any form you want. So that's what I see when we read Sri Aurobindo. I don't have to remember exactly where he said, what he said, how he said. But once we catch the idea, then I can go to a class, I can, with the children I can put it in a different manner, with the adults I can put it in a different manner, with devotees I can put it in a different manner. Because the idea gets expressed in different manner, different thoughts. So when I tell you something, you can go and tell in a different way. because you have caught the idea. All this I'm only emphasizing because of the single phrase to say wordless thought. So wordless thought is obviously that idea. Where there are no words, so what Ashwapati is experiencing is that idea level. So to go to the last paragraph here, an idea can be expressed in many different forms, in many different thoughts, just as when it comes down to a more material level, a thought can be expressed through many different words. Going downwards towards expression, that is spoken or written expression, there are many different words and different formulas which may serve to express a thought. But this thought is the only one of the forms of thought which can express the idea behind. And this idea itself, if it is followed deeply, has behind it a principle of spiritual knowledge and power which can then be spread and act on the manifestation. I suppose in yoga this has great relevance in the sense that we quarrel with each other because we don't accept each other's ideas or thoughts. We say, no, you say that's not right. So now we understand you cannot tell anyone that you are not right. Because that is the way the person has caught this idea. Say, we all have Auroville here in front of us, we have the idea and the ideal of human unity. But we are all trying to express it in our own way. And on the thought level, and then on the material level, she says, again we have different formulas and may express it in different ways. So that's what is interesting, that each one of us is expressing the idea of Auroville. Of course, the idea, I'll tell you again, behind the idea there is the ideal. And that ideal is of a greater source than idea. So let us say there is the ideal, the idea, the thought, and the manifestation. So what we are doing, perhaps without our own knowledge, is on the thought level. But because of which there are differences, there are quarrels, we don't accept each other. But if all of us were trying to come down to the level of the idea, what exactly is the idea that we are trying to express? So if we can kind of, distill the idea, then suddenly we say, hey, why are we quarreling? It's the same idea that I'm trying to tell, I'm trying to express. So I think we have to get into the level of the idea and not on the level of the thoughts. So she says, when you have a thought, you look for words, don't you? And then you try to arrange these words to express your thought. You can use many words to express a thought. You tell yourself, no, look, if I put this word instead of that, it would express what I'm thinking much better. That's what you learn when you are taught this style, how to write. But when I give you a written sentence which has the power to express a thought and tell you to concentrate on it, then through this thought form, you can get back to the idea behind, which can be expressed in many different thoughts. It's like a great hierarchy. Now this is the last sentence that I want you to notice. There's a principle right at the top, P capital, which itself is not the only one, for you can go still higher up. But this principle can be expressed in ideas, and these ideas can be expressed in great number of thoughts, and this great number of thoughts can make use of many languages and an even greater number of words. So this is the hierarchy. And so, if we want unity, on what level can we get unity? Not on the level of thoughts, not on the level of words that we use, not on the level of our material manifestation or expression. We can unite on the level of the idea. And that's why the mother started Auroville with an ideal. And of course, there was a conference at Sakar some years back when somebody said, India is only an idea. It's not a country. So I was a little amazed. I said, how's that? I mean, it's not a country. Well, I said, I don't really Now perhaps I understand why he said that. That it is, if you go deeper, I would call it more than an idea, it's an ideal. An ideal, what the mother calls it as the principle right at the top, that principle could be the ideal. So if Indian culture has set in front of it an ideal, which is being expressed in multiple thoughts, multiple variation, cultural factors, food, dresses, functions, religious festivals. So all these are connected by a single ideal of a spirituality. So that is what unites the country. So similarly, I was really, when I was reading that, I thought, I was very consciously thinking of Auroville. Yes, all our misunderstandings and struggles, and you see, the more we rely on this thought level, what comes forth? What is that emphasizes my thought? Is my ego. Because the thought is expressed according to my consciousness. And my consciousness, or the consciousness of my, is the ego. So now I see the source of these clashes is the thought. Because every thought wants to be the only thought, the only right one. But then let's keep quiet and say, okay, we are 50 of us, first let us meditate. Let's be quiet as much as possible. And if you are, suppose, sincere, that's what the mother also explained, as I remember. She says, when we are in a group collectivity, when we are trying to have a meeting amongst a number of people, she says, concentrate on what we agree with and not on what we disagree on. So now I understand, when we say, let us come together on what we agree with, immediately where does it take us to? The idea. We all agree that we are here in Auroville for this purpose. We all agree that we want unity amongst all the nationalities and cultures and all that. We all agree that we want to manifest the mother's vision. So if we can start a meeting with what we agree, immediately you see the principle, what the mother puts it as the principle. Now what would be the principle in Auroville? The principle would be the ideal of Auroville. And behind this ideal there is a presence. And that is the presence of the mother. So it's very, very simple for me now. I'm getting a clarity that we can achieve unity only in that principle or in that presence behind the principle. The presence is the mother. The principle is the ideal of human unity. And then the idea and the principle is that. And then there are ideas of how to manifest, as the mother said, on education level, on living pattern, on this and that. And that is now percolating into different thoughts. So if we want to come together and manifest the ideal, we must manifest ourselves as much as possible, because that's what she would like us to do, but always remembering the idea behind, the ideal behind it. So here is what I gathered about this question of thought and idea, the principle and the presence. And now after reading these lines from volume 9, if we go back to this passage that we read out, now things fall in place. Now all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts. So now, because knowledge is the common ordinary knowledge, which, as the mother explained here in the Sri Aurobindo's aphorism, which tells us that there are two allied powers in man, knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is so much of the truth seen in a distorted medium. So this distorted medium is the mind. So what is seen on the level of the mind is knowledge. But what is seen on the level of the spirit is wisdom. Therefore, knowledge is always divisive. Wisdom is always Unitarian, brings in the consciousness of oneness. So no wise man ever divides, he always unites, because he is in contact with that spirit. And all that is in contact with the mind and spoken through the mind and with the mind is bound to be one that is divisive in its expression. So this is what we see here. So all knowledge, A capital, K capital. So that is that knowledge, that is that wisdom, which is packed not into thoughts, but into ideas and into principles, lodged in the expectant stillness of its depths. You see the word again, expectant. Normally when we say the woman is expecting a baby, a child. So that means there is in the womb something that is to take form, to give birth. So here the silence is expectant. That means that silence which will give birth to something greater thing. So in that expectant silence, there is what Sherman would call here the wordless thoughts. And ultimately what happens? A crystal of the ultimate absolute, a portion of the inexpressible truth, revealed by silence to the silent soul. A beautiful sentence, revealed by silence to the silent soul. So all this knowledge, all this inspiration, all this question of wordless thoughts are revealed only in silence and to the silent soul. But can we say the soul is not silent? But here is not, the soul is not the psychic being per se. It is the whole being. When the whole being is silent, and in silence we can get this inspiration. And don't forget the sentence, a crystal of the ultimate absolute. The Aurovilians must know the meaning of the crystal. So what it means here, lodged in the expectant stillness of its depths, a crystal of the ultimate absolute, a portion of the inexpressible truth. So this crystal, which is being delivered by inspiration to this human being or to the silent soul, what does it do? It's a portion of the inexpressible truth. Here, of course, in the Matra Mandir, we have the crystal reflecting the sunlight. But as the mother always told us, it's only a symbolic thing. It is not that. Of course, on the physical level, you may say it is giving a light into the whole of Matra Mandir without any artificial light. That's on the material level. But we know that Matra Mandir is not only a physical material structure. There's something more behind it. So this crystal, which reflects a portion of the inexpressible truth. That inexpressible truth, which this crystal of inspiration brings to humankind, is of course the truth of the supermind. So when we say the crystal reflects the sun, it reflects the supramental truth. On the physical level, it's the sun. But on the spiritual level, it's the supramental truth. So there we have, and that is how I suppose when we go to Matra Mandir, we have this experience of silence and silent soul. So it is a matter of getting really silent and very personally, not that I go very regularly to Matra Mandir, but whenever I have been, most of the time, there's such a compelling silence. I mean, you enter the chamber, you almost don't have to make an effort to be silent. The whole globe there is nothing but a concrete silence. So now I can connect that in this silence, you can get to that crystal's, what the crystal is reflecting. So let me end by saying that in this silence of Matra Mandir, be it whatever the place, in that silence we go from beyond the words, beyond thoughts, into ideas, into the principle, into the presence. So even though there is nothing of Mother and Sri Aurobindo there, no photograph, nothing, and yet it draws you towards that principle. And what I read out last time applies same thing as opposed to Matra Mandir. To concentrate there at Matra Mandir or the Samadhi in order to increase our devotion to the Lord. Remember, Matra Mandir is not built only as a symbol, as she says, the soul of Aurobindo is true. But always remember, the psychic being is not just knowledge or consciousness, it is a manifestation of divine love. So what we have to, you may think of the mother or not, but I'm using the word divine love. But divine love not as an abstract concept, but the word is devotion. I mean, one has to have this feeling of bhakti, of devotion. So you go to Matra Mandir or you go to Samadhi, it's up to your convenience. But see, let us remember that this silence must take us to that principle where we are all united with that presence of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, which alone can really, I mean, the more we experience, the more I can feel the aspect of surrender. And the more we feel the aspect of surrender, the greater is our devotion. Long back when the Matra Mandir was being built, it's just in its building stages where there was not even the ramp. Champaklal ji once climbed up that iron staircase you had, And when he went up, the chamber had just the flat portion was there. He meditated there and he had a vision. The vision was that both Mother and Sri Aurobindo were there together in the chamber. Of course, there's not a chamber yet, but on the place which is the meditation hall now. And they were merging into each other as if there was no difference between them. And then Champaklalji has explained to me personally, and also it has come out in a print form, that itself shows that there is this aspect of the supermind there. Because as the mother in one of the messages tells us, when you stop distinguishing between Mother and Sri Aurobindo, that is the moment when you begin to see the supermind. When you don't see the separation, the division between this is Mother, that is Sri Aurobindo, blah, blah, blah. When you have that kind of a Unitarian vision, I mean, not mental concept that, they're both same. That's the mental explanation. But when you're spontaneously saying Mother is Sri Aurobindo is the Mother, she said that is the beginning of receiving the supramental consciousness. So what Champaklalji saw long back, long before the crystal was there, so he says, there is already the supramental consciousness. So if in that consciousness, if we sit in silence, I'm sure what we reach is the supramental principle. So that's it. I think I had something more, but I think it is very important to know about inspiration, about this silence of the mind, and all that we have discussed, we will take up from here now, from this line in our next class. Let's concentrate.